So we're here at the Swedish residence in Singapore, and we're doing something very Swedish. We're having fika. Fika is it's what Sweden runs on, essentially the break in your working day where you have coffee and maybe, like we are doing, a classic Swedish cinnamon roll together with your colleagues. And it's a nice way to take stock and communicate with your colleagues. That's what we're doing today, and the occasion is specifically the International Women's Day. And in 2021, of course, it's a particularly important year here in Singapore to do this, because it's been designated by the government here in Singapore as the year of SG women, so putting the focus on the achievements and the role of women in Singaporean society. Sweden is, of course, one of the countries that typically comes up at the top of every single conceivable ranking when it comes to women's rights and gender equality globally. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's still a lot of work to do. And that is one of the reasons that we have a government that calls itself a feminist government. And for me as ambassador, we have a foreign policy that we call a feminist foreign policy. Now, feminism is a word that is in this part of the world sometimes has a loaded meaning, but it's something that we want to say something really simple. It has to do with human rights, with the same rights of every individual. And it's about the rights, the resources, and the representation that women have, both globally. So we do this working with these issues on a global level, and also, of course, in our own country. I'm very, very pleased today to be here with two of the most powerful and persistent voices for gender equality in Singaporean society, and also one of our leaders in one of our very large multinationals, to talk about women's rights and gender equality. So I will turn to Eunice Olsen, who, as can be heard on the name, has a Swedish connection in her ancestry, and is a goodwill ambassador for Sweden here in Singapore. What I want to really ask you, Eunice, is about female leadership, and specifically about how do we encourage and work for the future female leadership. You, of course, have been a female leader from the very beginning, being the youngest ever nominated member of parliament in Singapore. You have won an Emmy for your fantastic series of Women Talk TV, where you give voice to female leaders. You have been a TV presenter, an actor, and I have your book inspiring children, young girls, to understand that they can do whatever they want. Eunice, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for all the work that you do for female leadership here in Singapore. And so I want to ask you a little bit about that. What has to happen? What can we do?
Oh, thank you so much, Niclas, firstly. And I think I'm very privileged to sit together here with two amazing people. Corinna, of course, we all know, and Vinod. Thank you for saying that we won the Emmy. Unfortunately, we didn't. We got nominated for an international Emmy, but it's so nice to hear that it is possible, just like everything else. I must say that when you think a little bit about female leadership, and like what you were talking about, there's just so many things to talk about, and the breadth really, I think we can go on for hours. But when we think of the future, I think one of the things that I feel that we must and always focus on is the present. I mean, what we are going to do in the present will definitely pave the way for the future. And as I was kind of thinking a little bit about this, I was just, putting together all the different spaces that we need to talk about. So in my very, very humble opinion, I think three big areas. One, of course, is on a governmental level. Right, when we talk about the future, I mean, right, even at this point in Singapore, we are looking at climate change and how we're kind of engendering policies that are looking forward to climate change and making sure that Singapore is, acceding to what we need to do for climate change. If you think about gender, it is kind of the same thing. It is kind of a long-term policy that you need to put together. So I think the wheel of the leadership is very, very important. And of course, as we celebrate kind of women this year in Singapore, And I'm sure Corinna is going to have much more to say about that. But I think the will of the leadership and governmental policy is very, very important, because then you set a national priority for it. And whenever you set a national priority, you look at policies and look at different ministries administering their policies, and then that then trickles down into kind of the everyday way of life, if you like. So we're doing that for climate change now, and I think you've got to put that same mindset behind gender. And then when you talk about progression, when you talk about being a first world nation, that is what you come up with, right? So on a governmental level, I think that's really, really important. I think the second thing then will be going a little bit into Vinod's territory here, will be at the corporate level, right? And that, there's so many companies now that have come out, and I think COVID has kind of, I wouldn't want to say exacerbated, but not exacerbated, but kind of had a huge push, for this big term that we've been talking about for so many years, which is flexible work arrangement, right? And just making a conducive kind of environment for women to work in. And a lot of the problems we experience at the senior leadership and even at the board level comes because women have to make choices, right? And that's very, very apparent. And of course, that will bring me to my next point later about, which is about unconscious biases, right? We have so many biases, even at a hiring level, questions that I hear women are asked, if your child is sick, or if you have work, who will you choose?
Yeah.
And these are still questions that are being asked today, in 2021. So, even at a corporate level, you have to put into place policies. Again, it's the will of the leadership, but at the same time, how it then trickles down and truncates down into the rest of the organization. So making conducive environment, HR policies, having mentorship, and I think one big thing that we talk about, two things. One is men supporting women, kind of providing mentors or helping to pave the way. But the second thing is also women supporting women. And I think sometimes we kind of take that for granted a little bit, because at the corporate level, we always hear about women competing with other women, right? If you get to a certain stage and then I don't want anybody else to be where I am, I then start to get very protective of my territory. So even at a corporate level, that's something to be. So the mentorship. And Vinod and Corinna will definitely have more to say about that. But I just kind of want to go down to a little bit more to perhaps something that is very close to my heart, which is media, and also at an individual level. So for me, very importantly is the language that we use to speak to girls, to young girls and young women, and that starts at home, that starts in school. The kind of language that we use around girls, right? Don't do this, girls don't do this, girls don't do that, girls shouldn't look like that, girls shouldn't wear that. As a girl, you should think of that. These are sports that boys play more. Just kind of the language that we have in society that I feel there's just so much kind of entrenched, biases just in our language. And sometimes just we don't realize that we do it. I've had, kind of people talk about, oh yeah, you shouldn't be considered a lady because ladies are gentle and demure. Just things like that we say to young women. And even in schools, for example, if you have a robotics competition, are you going to send a team of boys, or would you also encourage girls to go for that? So it's so important at the individual level, and I think it stays. It's at home and also in school, and also then the whole conversation around mentoring as well. We need role models, and I really, really want to kind of encourage anybody who's out there is a woman who wants to come forward and kind of be a role model for girls as well. That's just so important. You need mentorship, right? You need role models that girls can look up to. And then, of course, the industry that is the closest to me, which is the media, how we put forward media, the kind of roles that we have in theatre, in film, on television. If anybody has heard of this thing called the Scully effect, where we know Gillian Anderson, who's played Agent Scully in the X-Files, after her role came out, if you look at it parallelly, you see all these women coming forward to want to become forensic scientists. So a lot of film, a lot of television, we always say that the media parallels the world, and we kind of have this almost blind trust I mean, yes, even in the midst of fake news, right? We look at television and it kind of eats into our psyche as well. So we see very strong roles for girls, for women, CEOs, lawyers, doctors, scientists, entrepreneurs, leaders, political leaders. You know, it kind of says that's somebody that I can be. So the media and the advertising space, what we put forward as well, plays a very, very strong role for young girls. So if like a toy is pink or a toy is blue, you know, and if we advertise it to girls like pink toys or like, you know, bicycles for boys and dolls for girls, why can't boys play with dolls and girls, you know, play with the soccer ball, whatever. But even the kind of advertising that we put up will eat into the psyche. And the reason why I bring all this up is because at the end of the day, you want to nurture leaders that don't have these insecurities and unnecessary expectations that they have to face with every day. And it's something that you grow up with, the language that you grow up with, right? And so when I was talking a little bit about how women have to make choices, even in caregiving, it's always, it's your sister will look after you or your sister will look after the family, right? I mean, it's just like, as a girl, that is my responsibility. So even in many different parts of the world, and when I ask, you know, some families in developing countries, they say, oh yeah, we want to have girls because the girl will go out and work. Or even, you know, the girl will go out and work and therefore I can send my brother to school. Right, so it's all these things that they grow up with that they have to live, and therefore when they eventually, you know, finally make it, right, and they have to become leaders, then, but all these internal biases will say, but then that's a choice I have to make, and therefore it is my responsibility to look after my family.
Yeah.
And of course, at the end of the day, it's everybody's responsibility to look after their family, right? And but you know, you want to nurture leaders that that are secure about who they can be and not have all these different, whether it's expectations or biases against them. So it's at every level that this needs to be addressed if we want kind of secure, if we want to groom secure women leaders for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I really take your point about the role models. And of course, that's both the women that you present in your book and in the TV episodes as well. And by the way, you know, since I have 3 sons and a daughter, I'm living that thing, the pink blue thing. But the point is, you can have pink toys and become an ambassador or become a leader, and that's what I'm what I'm telling my daughter. Vinod. Of course, you know, you bring to this discussion something very interesting. You're a very senior business leader. You are the country president for AstraZeneca. Of course, AstraZeneca now very much in the news with the COVID vaccine. But of course, you know, here in this region, a lot of the big health issues like cancer, like diabetes, like asthma, you work on those. You've had senior roles both in a number of countries in the region and for a long time in the United States. And I think the question to you is, even in a country like Sweden, where, you know, we are famous for having, you know, if you go to government, parliament, ambassadors, you know, we are 50-50 more or less women and men. But the final frontier is always the corporate sector and the businesses, and particularly right at the top. Today, actually, The Economist came up with its glass ceiling index, and I was happy to note that Sweden is number 1 in the world. But that's not a reason to be complacent, because there's still so much to do, including also, of course, on the pay gap. But I wanted to ask you, Vinod, on that, both a little bit how a multinational corporation like AstraZeneca is working with gender equality, because governments can do things like, you know, parental leave policies, or, you know, provide daycare and so on, like we do in Sweden. But the companies have, at the end of the day, the most important role in also releasing potential. And your long experience also from your previous career.
Great, thank you, Ambassador, for the opportunity, and great to be part of this panel to really talk about this topic as we get ready to celebrate International Women's Day. I want to maybe answer your questions from a couple of perspectives. Let me take a step back and tell you a little bit about how AstraZeneca is thinking about gender equality as a global, you know, innovative biopharmaceutical company. And I also want to tell you a little bit about what we are doing about it in Singapore. But before I go there, I think the theme for this year's International Women's Day, which is Choose to Challenge, resonates with me a lot. I read in a clip recently that a challenged world is an aware world, right? And when you challenge, there is enough momentum for action and for impact. So I'm really pleased that we are choosing to challenge as we really embrace International Women's Day on March 8th. Now, AstraZeneca as a global biopharmaceutical company, we thrive on innovation and advancing science. And inclusion and diversity is such an integral part of who we are, the DNA of our organization. And one component of inclusion and diversity for us is gender diversity, and it's an important thing. The way we look at gender equality globally is it's also a sustainability commitment for AstraZeneca. A lot of our sustainability initiatives are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, and AstraZeneca has chosen to focus on 6, where we feel like we have the capacity to action and have an impact. And one of that, the 6, is actually gender equality. So I'm quoting from our recently published sustainability report, and when I read this, it really made an impact on me. Gender equality, achieving gender equality, is forecasted to add $28 trillion in GDP globally by 2025. $28 trillion. And if you continue as business as usual, it's going to take us 200 years, 202 to be precise, to achieve gender equality, right? So now that's, those numbers are very impactful to me. It kind of really puts the spotlight on the urgency to really embrace this dialogue and move it forward, right? Now, what are we doing as AstraZeneca as a company? And I'll focus more specifically on what are we doing in Asia. We have a couple of signature initiatives that provide the platform for women as they start in the workforce within the healthcare industry. And one of those is the Empowerment Program, which is focused on women as they start their careers. How can they learn from each other, and how can they put their hands up for leadership roles? So these are cohorts of women that come together and kind of share those early experiences that help them decide if the leadership track is something that they would like to pursue. The second program, which is an extension of that, is an award-winning program in AstraZeneca, which is called Women as Leaders. And this is a 6-month immersion program where women that are on leadership tracks go through a 6-month program, as I just mentioned, where they learn from each other and they hear perspectives on what it takes to win in today's world, and how as women as leaders, how can they contribute to really drive that change and lead from the front. And again, coming out of COVID and embracing the new normal, there's a lot to be said about what's going to take to really succeed in a post-COVID environment. It's about providing psychological safety for our team members. It's about nurturing. It's about leading with empathy and compassion. And I think these are the traits we believe women leaders are able to bring to the table more seamlessly to be able to transition to a post-COVID environment. So I'm really excited about that. The third bit that I want to mention is a program that we call as Accelerate, and this is focused towards emerging markets and opportunities for women in emerging markets to put their hands up for leadership roles. And again, this is very targeted towards the emerging markets. And again, what's really satisfying when you look at how these programs have been able to deliver is folks that go through these programs, women that go through these programs, there's a 30% promotion rate in terms of once they graduated from it and how they move on in their careers. So it is really great to see the output of and the impact of these programs in terms of accelerating careers and leadership tracks for women. Now, how does this all kind of tie together, right? Globally, we have an aspiration to increase the percentage of women in middle management and senior management roles. So right now that percentage for AstraZeneca is 47%, and we want to move towards 50% and above by 2025. We want to increase the participation of or representation of women in our executive board, and right now that number is 36%. We want to continue to build on that. In Singapore, we are operating from a position of strength. Globally, we are trying to get to gender equality in terms of overall workplace representation. In Singapore, we stand at 60%, women participation in our workforce. And I'm really proud to say that my leadership team that actually drives the commercialization of drugs in Singapore across the different disease areas that you mentioned is an all-women team. Right, and I learn from them every day. And to your point earlier, I've had the opportunity to have worked in many different countries through my career, and I've benefited a lot from the women leaders that I've worked with, the perspectives that I've been able to get from them to be a better and impactful leader myself. Yeah, so International Women's Day is a great platform to recognize the contribution of women in the workplace and spotlight on women in leadership. And I want to put my hands up to say that I'm committed to contributing to empowerment and gender equality in the workplace.
Thank you very much, Vinod Narayanan from AstraZeneca. And a couple of takeaways from what you have been saying. One is, of course, the money aspect. How many resources will be unlocked? And in fact, to your point, I just read a McKinsey study on this as well that said that essentially if you don't address after COVID the negative gender effect of COVID, you will lose $1 trillion. However, if you do the maximum to address it, you can actually gain 13 trillion, according to this McKinsey report. And of course, that requires, as I also think you spoke about emerging markets, and of course, to have that global effect, really emerging markets is the place to look. So thank you very much. Corinna Lim, now I'm so happy to have you here at the Swedish residence. You're of course a lawyer, you're a tech entrepreneur, but we know you because you are since 10 years the executive director of AWARE. And you couldn't ask for a more prominent voice for gender equality in Singapore. And when I think of AWARE, I think of the most sort of tireless, persistent advocacy voice that has grown from being a volunteer organization and under your leadership, of course, now very structured organization that is in many different parts. You work with companies, you work with the government on advocacy, you work with individuals and support. And it shows another aspect of Swedish foreign policy that we're very proud of is that we very much work systematically to support the role of civil society. And you couldn't have a more eloquent member of civil society here. What I'd like to ask you, Corinna, is first of all, perhaps a little bit, since AWARE plays such an important role, your AWARE's approach, the work that AWARE does, but particularly this year when the government has come out with its stated intent to have the year of SG Women, how you will harness that in your work.
Thank you. And thank you for the kind words. So there are two things that the government announced. SG Women, and earlier announced a gender equality review, which is really, I think, the concrete plan to do something about trying to make gender equality a fundamental value of Singapore. Now, this is an important point because although we have many women in the workforce and there's equal education for girls, we see girls outpacing boys as well, right? Which is a trend that has been happening in education for many years now. But it's still not a fundamental value, because when we approached this, it was very much about let's make sure that we have as many skilled people as possible in the economy. That's why we gave education to girls. But it was not in the same way that I think some other countries like Sweden approached it, that it was an aspiration, right? Gender equality in itself was an aspiration because it is just a human right. It is good for people, and we try to get the most potential from them. It was really much more so that, for Singapore's case, so that we could have as many skilled people as possible in the workforce. So we're in some ways reviewing that, right? The thing is, once you give women education, you open that box and you cannot close it again. And there are a lot of things that come out from it, which is also that women now are making their mark in leadership, in governments, in corporations, but there are some things that are holding them back, which are the family values, right, that we have, which is, men as breadwinner, women as caregivers, and that is holding society back. So we now need to go back to a values perspective to see how can we really, really embed this value in all of society, not just in our education system, but also, very importantly, in our families, right? And what does that mean for men and boys? Because I think, where there's a change, and this year it's choose to challenge the status quo. This can be scary for people, right? Many women will say gender equality, or people think gender equality is something for women. But actually, gender equality is also something about giving opportunities to men to be able to give care. When you took your daddy leave, I'm sure it must have been quite a rewarding 6 months that you did.
Nobody ever regrets it.
Right. See? And we don't have that experience in Singapore, right? How many dads do 6 months leave? This is maybe, yourself and a few others. It's just very rare in Singapore. So yes, that message that men won't regret it, right? That this is something that is also for them in ways that you can't count in terms of monetary benefits, but it's wonderful for dads to be able to connect, and it will then become a lifelong connection with your kids, right? So I think there's just so much in that, right? And that's just that one measure, and it's not going to be easy, but can we give more parental leave to men and women, right? And I think that is probably one of the successes of all the Nordic countries, where you have moved the needle on gender equality more so than many other countries in the world, right? And I think the parental leave piece is an important one. Equal parental leave for men and women, and trying to give incentives as much as possible for men to take that. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. And I really think that is a key enabler to enable both men and women to have equal careers. On Singapore, I think it's also important, as you say, to highlight in Sweden too, in any culture, that this is part of the family thinking. Singapore often seen as very traditional, but one of the cool things about Singapore is that when Singapore's success is not in fact being sort of traditional complacent, but taking risk and daring to be the first to do things. And what I hope and I think is encouraging is that the government is focusing on this new frontier. Yes. And I hope that Singapore as a country applies the same sort of kiasu kind of feeling that, leading on this going forward. So it's exciting. And I also think increasingly all the things that both Sweden and Singapore want to be. We want to be innovative, cutting edge and so on. Can you really be that and not focus on gender equality? I don't think so, for one. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about your work and where's...
Yes. So I think having to deal with this problem at all levels is something that we believe in, and we have structured the work as such, right? So you have care services for women who need support, whether it's because they're going through a situation where they've been sexually assaulted, or they're going through or considering a divorce and something's happening in the family. And then with organizations, and this is where companies become really important, right? Because companies have the potential to really make such a big difference in the lives of people and their families, right? And so, women's leadership, what you have talked about in terms of giving women opportunities, leveling the playing field, that's critical. And wow, to have an all-women's team, it's like, wow, it's fantastic, right? Yeah, so, and then of course at the policy level, which I think is where you get the biggest bang for the buck, right? So the research and the advocacy that we do is critical, right? And we have, every time we research, invariably we will turn to also the Sweden, other Nordic countries, where you are the leaders in so many of these areas, right? And we are drawing from the lessons that you've learned, what has worked, and also, where applicable, applying it to Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, all three of you. I really feel we could talk a lot longer, but we're making this available on social media. And I want to finish by saying that International Women's Day is an opportunity for us, I think, both to celebrate a little bit the progress that has been made, where we're doing it by having a little Swedish fika, but perhaps most importantly, to take a deep breath, recognize how much work is still to be done, but go into that with full enthusiasm and positivity, which I think all three of you have really exemplified. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you to the audience as well.